They smiled for the cameras. They posed on red carpets. But behind the velvet curtain of old Hollywood, 10 women were quietly running the show, not with contracts, not with box office numbers, but with something far more dangerous: raw, unstoppable power over the men who thought they were in charge. Studio moguls, presidents, legendary athletes. All of them undone. This isn't just a list of beautiful faces. It's the untold story of how 10 actresses turned desire into a weapon, scandal into strategy, and heartbreak into legend. By the end of this video, you'll never watch a classic Hollywood movie the same way again. Stick around. The last name on this list might just be the most powerful of them all. Number 1, Mae West, the woman who turned sex into a business empire. Picture a Hollywood where women were expected to be quiet, modest, and endlessly agreeable. Then picture one woman strolling straight through that expectation, wearing diamonds and a smirk that dared anyone to stop her. That was Mae West. She didn't wait for permission to be powerful. She built it herself, line by razor-sharp line. What made Mae different wasn't just her curves or her confidence, it was her brain. While other stars relied on studios to shape their image, Mae wrote her own material. She crafted her own punchlines, engineered her own scandals, and outmaneuvered censors who tried again and again to shut her down. Every time Hollywood's moral guardians thought they'd contained her, she found a sharper, funnier way to slip past them, and audiences loved her even more for it. Her humor was legendary because it did two things at once: it made people laugh, and it made them think twice about who really held the power in the room. She turned innuendo into an art form, and in doing so, she proved something Hollywood wasn't ready to admit: that a woman in complete control of her own sexuality was more threatening, and more magnetic, than any manufactured starlet. Off camera, Mae was reportedly one of the shrewdest business minds in the entertainment industry, negotiating deals and creative control that most actresses of her era could only dream of. She wasn't chasing scandal for attention. She was using it as currency. Every raised eyebrow, every scandalized headline, became fuel for her fame and her fortune. Mae West proved a truth that Hollywood tried to bury for decades: confidence, not innocence, was the real seduction. But if you think she was the boldest woman of her generation, wait until you meet the actress who didn't need a single word to hypnotize an entire industry. Number 2, Greta Garbo, the silence that seduced the world. Now imagine the complete opposite approach to fame: a woman who said almost nothing, gave almost no interviews, and still became one of the most desired faces on the planet. That's the paradox of Greta Garbo, the Swedish import who conquered Hollywood not with volume, but with mystery. In an industry built on spectacle, Garbo's power came from restraint. Her performances during the silent era relied entirely on her eyes and expression, no dialogue needed, and audiences were spellbound. When sound arrived and threatened to end the careers of countless silent stars, Garbo didn't just survive the transition, she thrived, because her presence was never about noise. It was about depth. Off-screen, she guarded her privacy like a fortress. She avoided crowds, dodged interviews, and famously wished to be left alone, a phrase that became more iconic than almost any line she ever spoke on film. But that retreat from the spotlight didn't diminish her allure, it multiplied it. The less the public could access her, the more they wanted to. Rumors swirled about romantic entanglements with both men and women, but Garbo never confirmed or denied any of it. She let the mystery do the talking, and Hollywood, a town obsessed with gossip, found itself utterly powerless against a woman who simply refused to play the game. Garbo didn't chase headlines. Headlines chased her. And decades after she walked away from the industry entirely, she remained its most haunting unanswered question. But mystery wasn't the only way to hold Hollywood hostage. Some women did it by refusing to be anyone but themselves, tuxedos and all. Number 3, Marlene Dietrich, the woman who rewrote the rules of desire. If Garbo ruled through silence, Marlene Dietrich ruled through defiance. German-born and utterly fearless, Dietrich arrived in Hollywood and immediately shattered expectations of what a leading lady was supposed to look like, sound like, and act like. Her voice alone was a weapon, smoky, low, and instantly recognizable. Paired with a half-smile that seemed to know something the audience didn't, she turned films into hypnosis sessions. But it was her style that truly shocked 1930s audiences. Dietrich frequently wore tailored tuxedos and traditionally masculine clothing, blurring gender lines decades before it was fashionable or accepted to do so. This wasn't a costume choice, it was a statement. Dietrich refused to be boxed into anyone's definition of femininity, and that refusal became central to her mystique. Rumors of relationships with both men and women followed her throughout her career, and rather than deny or hide from the speculation, she let her legend grow even larger in its shadow. What truly set her apart, though, was what she did during wartime. While many stars stayed comfortably distant from global conflict, Dietrich traveled to entertain troops during World War II, trading Hollywood glamour for genuine courage on the front lines. It was proof that behind the tuxedos and the sultry stare was a woman of real substance. Marlene Dietrich never asked Hollywood for a rulebook, she wrote her own, then dared the industry to keep up. But not every woman on this list found her power through control. Some found it through absolute, uncontainable chaos, and one story ends in a scandal so shocking it made front-page news for weeks. Number 4. Lana Turner, discovered by chance, destroyed by scandal. Every Hollywood dream needs an origin story, and Lana Turner's is one of the most famous in cinema history. A teenage girl, sipping a soda at a cafe, spotted and swept into stardom almost overnight. It sounds like a fairy tale. It was anything but. Turner quickly became one of MGM's brightest and most bankable stars, her beauty and charisma making her a favorite among the most powerful men in the industry. For a while, it seemed like her rise would never stop. But Hollywood fairy tales rarely end without a twist, and Turner's life took a dark and very public turn in 1958. That year, a scandal erupted involving Turner's daughter and her mobster boyfriend, Johnny Stompanato, an event so explosive it turned Turner from a beloved leading lady into tabloid royalty overnight. The details dominated headlines for weeks, and suddenly the woman known for glamour was equally known for tragedy. What's remarkable is how Turner handled the aftermath. Rather than disappearing from public life in shame, she remained composed, elegant, and resilient, even as the scandal followed her for the rest of her career. She turned personal catastrophe into a strange kind of enduring stardom, proving she was far tougher than her soft-focus film roles ever suggested. Lana Turner wasn't simply a beauty discovered by luck. She was a survivor who learned, the hard way, how to turn pain into permanence in the public imagination. But if you think scandal was rare in classic Hollywood, wait until you hear about the star whose fame began before scandal even had a name, and whose life ended tragically young. Number 5. Jean Harlow, the original bombshell who died too soon. Before Marilyn Monroe ever stepped in front of a camera, there was Jean Harlow, the woman who essentially invented the concept of the platinum blonde bombshell. In the early 1930s, when Hollywood still expected its actresses to be demure, Harlow showed up with a playful smirk and an attitude that dared audiences to look away. They never could. Harlow's boldness wasn't just about her look, it was about attitude. She brought a raw, unapologetic sensuality to the screen at a time when that kind of confidence in a woman was considered scandalous. Rather than shrink from the attention, she leaned into it, and audiences rewarded her with a devotion that made her one of the biggest stars of her era. Off-screen, whispers of secret romances and a scandalous personal life only added fuel to her fame. But Harlow's story carries a tragic weight that separates her from almost everyone else on this list. She died at just 26 years old, at the absolute height of her career, stunning an industry that had barely begun to understand her impact. In her brief time in the spotlight, Harlow managed to redefine what sensuality on screen could look like: bold, electric, and entirely her own. Decades later, her influence is still visible in every blonde bombshell who followed in her footsteps, whether audiences realize it or not. Jean Harlow proved that a short life could still leave an enormous shadow. But speaking of enormous shadows, one actress's tragic marriages and whispered heartbreak turned her into a goddess audiences worshipped and barely understood at all. Number 6. Rita Hayworth, the goddess nobody truly knew. In the 1940s, one name was practically synonymous with desire itself: Rita Hayworth. with flaming red hair and a screen presence so magnetic it earned her the nickname, the Love Goddess. Hayworth became the woman every man wanted and every woman studied, especially after her legendary performance in Gilda. But the goddess title came at a steep personal cost. Behind the glamorous image was a far gentler, more heartbroken woman than audiences ever saw on screen. She reportedly once remarked that men fell for the fantasy character she played, not the real woman underneath, a quiet admission of just how lonely that gap between image and reality could be. Hayworth's personal life reflected that same push and pull between fantasy and pain. She married 5 times, including a headline-making marriage to Prince Ali Khan, and each relationship brought its own mix of passion and heartbreak into the public eye. Hollywood adored the image she projected, but rarely seemed interested in understanding the woman actually living behind it. Despite the personal toll, Hayworth's grace and sensuality on screen defined an entire era of American cinema. She didn't just play a goddess; for a decade, she basically was one, whether she wanted the title or not. Rita Hayworth showed the world how heavy a crown could be. But not every leading lady wore hers so quietly. Some wore theirs like armor, daring anyone to try and take it from them. Number 7. Ava Gardner, the star who refused to behave. Hollywood in the 1940s and 50s had an unwritten rulebook for its leading ladies. Be graceful, be composed, be whatever the studio needed you to be. Ava Gardner tossed that rulebook out entirely. With striking green eyes and a temper to match, she didn't follow Hollywood's rules. She simply made her own and dared the industry to object. Men were drawn to her because she felt dangerous, unpredictable, and completely real in an industry full of manufactured personas. Her love life became the stuff of legend, including a famously passionate relationship with Frank Sinatra, an earlier marriage to Mickey Rooney, and reported romances with bullfighters during her time in Spain. Every chapter of her personal life read like its own dramatic screenplay. What set Gardner apart from so many of her contemporaries was her refusal to hide behind a polished studio image. She drank when she wanted, spoke her mind without filter, and loved fiercely and openly, never once apologizing for living exactly as she pleased in an era that demanded women do the opposite. That authenticity is exactly what made her sensuality so compelling. It wasn't manufactured for the cameras. It was simply who she was, on and off the set, and audiences could sense the difference between a performance and the real thing. Ava Gardner didn't just capture Hollywood's imagination, she left behind a trail of legendary stories and broken hearts that still get talked about today. But while Gardner ruled through rebellion, one actress ruled through sheer, unrelenting ambition, and she fought for every inch of power she ever held. Number 8. Joan Crawford, built from nothing, unstoppable at the top. Joan Crawford's story is, at its core, a story about survival. Born into poverty, she clawed her way up from chorus line obscurity to become an Oscar-winning legend, and she never let anyone forget how hard she'd fought to get there. Crawford's screen presence was commanding, but it was nothing compared to her off-screen intensity. She was famous for her perfectionism, her rigid discipline, and a work ethic that bordered on obsessive. She believed deeply that success wasn't given, it was taken, fought for, and defended, and she approached her career with the mentality of a general planning a campaign. Her romantic life was equally intense, involving relationships with some of the most powerful men in the industry, relationships that earned her both admiration and, at times, outright fear from those around her. She wasn't interested in being universally liked. She was interested in staying on top, no matter what that required. Behind the glamorous exterior, though, Crawford reportedly carried real loneliness and an unshakable anxiety about losing her position at the top of an industry that constantly threatened to replace her with someone younger. That fear, arguably, is what drove her relentless perfectionism in the first place. Whether people loved her or feared her, nobody in Hollywood could afford to ignore Joan Crawford. She proved that ambition alone could be just as seductive as beauty. But ambition and beauty were nothing compared to the woman who married 8 times and somehow made every single one of them feel like the love story of the century. Number 9. Elizabeth Taylor, the violet-eyed queen who answered to no one. Elizabeth Taylor wasn't just a Hollywood star, she was Hollywood royalty, and she made sure everyone knew it. With rare violet eyes and a presence that filled every room she entered, Taylor didn't simply attract attention. She commanded it, effortlessly, from a young age straight through to the end of her career. Her life off-screen was every bit as dramatic as her performances on it. She married 8 times, treating each relationship with the same full-hearted intensity she brought to her acting. Her most explosive and famous romance was with Richard Burton, a relationship that ignited on the set of Cleopatra and became one of the most talked-about love affairs in entertainment history. Together, Taylor and Burton became a genuine power couple, glamorous, chaotic, and seemingly unable to stay away from each other no matter how many times their relationship fell apart and reignited. The public couldn't look away, and neither, it seemed, could they. But Taylor was far more than her headlines. She was fiercely independent, refusing to let studio executives dictate her choices the way so many actresses of her generation were forced to. She fought for the roles she wanted, the life she wanted, and the freedom she wanted, regardless of the cost or the controversy it generated. Every man who got close to Elizabeth Taylor fell under her spell, but she was always the one holding the power in the relationship. She didn't just rule Hollywood glamour, she ruled its passion on her own terms. And now, finally, we arrive at the woman who might be the most iconic, and most misunderstood, star in Hollywood history. Number 10, Marilyn Monroe, the goddess behind the fragile smile. She's the name everyone was waiting for. Marilyn Monroe wasn't simply a movie star, she became a cultural phenomenon so powerful that, decades later, her image is still instantly recognizable around the world. Her breathy voice, platinum curls, and an almost hypnotic sense of innocence made her the defining symbol of desire in 1950s America. But here's what most people miss. Monroe's soft, giggling persona was far more calculated than audiences realized. She understood exactly how to use her image to gain leverage in an industry almost entirely controlled by men, turning perceived softness into genuine influence behind the scenes. Her personal life fueled headlines constantly, with rumored relationships involving President John F. Kennedy, baseball icon Joe DiMaggio, and acclaimed playwright Arthur Miller keeping her name in the press practically non-stop. Yet her real power was never just physical. It was emotional. Monroe had a rare ability to make anyone in the room feel like the only person who mattered, a skill far rarer and more powerful than beauty alone. Underneath the adoration, though, Monroe reportedly struggled with intense loneliness and the crushing pressure of maintaining an image the entire world had projected onto her. Her sensuality was simultaneously her greatest strength, and, in many ways, her heaviest burden to carry. No other actress has ever ruled the world's collective fantasy quite like Marilyn Monroe. She remains, even now, the undisputed queen of seduction in the history of American cinema, proof that the most powerful women in Hollywood weren't just beautiful. They were strategic, resilient, and impossible to forget.